Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to Taking Care of Our Mental Health, an International Women's Week event hosted by the Royal Ottawa Hospital and Invest Ottawa. My name is Sonia Shorey. I have the privilege of serving as the Vice President Strategy, Marketing and Communications for Invest Ottawa, lead economic development agency for knowledge-based industries here in the capital, and Bayview Yards, Ottawa's one-stop business acceleration shop. I am also honored to serve as a director of the board for the Institute of Mental Health Research at the Royal Ottawa Hospital. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we virtually gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial. We are grateful to have the opportunity to be present and gather with you in this territory. 1 year ago today, the first case of COVID-19 was reported in Ottawa region. The World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. 1 year later, many schools were closed. Organizations moved to work from home. And on March 24th, the shutdown started and a state of emergency was declared in our province. As we cross these 1 year milestones, there is no question the pandemic has put tremendous pressure on our collective mental health. Substance use is on the rise. More people, including women, are reporting increased stress, depression, and anxiety. In October 2020, the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health and Delvinia Global Research released important data on the mental health impacts of the pandemic here in Canada. Nearly 1/4 of women, almost 25%, indicated experiencing moderate to severe anxiety, significantly higher than the 17% found among men. The same gender gap was evident in reports of loneliness, 23% for women, 17% for men. During this same period globally, CARE released the results of a survey that engaged more than 6,000 women and 4,000 men across 40 countries worldwide last fall. One of the biggest disparities they found in their research, 27% of women had increased challenges in relation to mental illness compared to 10% of men. They identified due to the fact that unpaid labor in the home had increased exponentially, and this in many cases had led to stress, worries about food, childcare, work, professional development, and healthcare. These are complex issues, and we will address them today with leaders from the Royal Ottawa Hospital. The Royal is one of Canada's most foremost mental health teaching and research hospitals. The mandate is simple: to help more people living with mental illness and addiction into recovery faster. As you will learn today, this world-class hospital is also providing critical support during this pandemic, and it builds on a host of research, programs, resources, and expertise for women in mental health. These include the Women's Mental Health Program, created out of a need to address the unique way women experience mental illness, treatment, and recovery because of differences in our biology and social roles. The 3 areas of focus include capacity building, peer support, and research. The Shirley E. Greenberg Resource Center for Women, which aims to provide information about available support to women with mental illness and their family members, plays an absolutely critical role in our community. Of course, there's the annual Run for Women, which you will hear a lot about, that I have personally participated in. We encourage everyone to come out and to support that incredible cause. And the Women for Mental Health is a philanthropic program that the Royal brings together with like-minded women who inspire conversations and support for mental health to shift critical attitudes and make real progress in changing the way people think about mental health. I'm honored to serve as your MC for today's event. A quick overview of our agenda. We will begin with a fireside chat on leadership and resilience with Manjula Selvajaria, journalist, syndicated columnist, and public speaker, and Joanne Bezabitz, President and CEO of the Royal Ottawa. We will then follow with interactive sessions and breakout groups. All of you can choose that look at key mental health impacts and trends, one dedicated to substance abuse, the second dedicated to sleep. We invite your questions in the chat box and we will be watching for you. And our open sessions will be guided by you. We will wrap up those sessions as you determine the timing that is appropriate, and you can shift between different rooms. So With that, we will now launch into our opening session. It's my pleasure to introduce Manjula and Joanne, who will guide us through our fireside chat. Thank you both for being with us for this.
Thank you, Sonia, for that lovely introduction. And I think we'll have to go on the run together then. That sounds like yeah, why not? Why not put a mask on and do that? Joanne, it's a real pleasure to get the chance to sit down like this, virtually, of course, and have this conversation. I wanted to start with your own stories, because you've had quite the trajectory in terms of where you are in your career now. But you've always been very humble about saying, hey, it's taken a lot of steps to get here. So, let's get into your own stories. Tell us how you've overcome challenges in your own life.
Thank you very much for asking the question, and thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm really touched that there was interest in my expertise in myself, because I'm here as an individual, as a leader, but also to tell some of my story in the hopes that it'll inspire some of the people who are in the audience today. And I know we have many men and women that are watching us. So as I thought about how I might introduce my story, I wanted to give a clear picture that I wasn't always CEO, and I wasn't always where I am in my life. I wasn't always, having certain successes. And that there were successes along the way, but there were also failures. And I'm really proud of those failures, because with every failure, it opened the door to the next success. But I guess, a real turning point for me in my life was when I was maybe 29 or 30 years old. And I had to move back in with my mother just because of my life circumstances. And so I think, anybody in the audience can appreciate that you're well into your adulthood by that time. And to have to take what I considered at that time a step back into my life moving forward, it was a really tough decision. It was a necessary decision. And it was probably the best decision of my life. Because after all of that came those successes and failures and all the steps that have helped me along the way to be where I am today. And I mean, this is not the final destination. There are, many other hopes and dreams that I've got as well that I would like to achieve. And, but it did help to, open that door so that I could make other kinds of decisions and move forward. And, maybe the second most important decision that I made very, very shortly after that was to go back to school. And so that's a big step. And I know there might be some people in the audience thinking, when is it too late to go back to school? When is it, when do you really just have to keep marching along on working and so forth? And it was really tough because, financially it was a burden. Education is always very costly. But the way that I looked at it was, I had support from my family, and I could make a very tough decision, go back to school and start building off of those successes as they came along. And it wasn't my first or last decision about schooling, because after I got that college degree, I got a bachelor's degree, then I got an MBA, and then even later, I decided to go for a PhD. So, the academic journey was very long, but it started with that one decision when I was 30 years old to move back in my family home.
Isn't that interesting? And then I'm sure that you felt that at every time when you reapproached the idea of going back to school, that you had to make that decision again, that you had to go through that thinking process again. Is it worthwhile? Should I do this?
Yes. And the cool thing about education, or at least what my experience was, and let's remember we're talking about the expertise that I have and what my life experience has been. It could be very different for someone else. was the more education I took on and the more that I learned, the more I was able to be very picky and selective about what I wanted to learn about. So the magic is, by the time you're at a doctorate level, you are focused 100% into what you're interested in. And you've gone through all those steps of learning the fundamentals and the building blocks and so forth. And so by the time you're mature in your learning, then you only focus on those things you really, really love and you want to spend all your time learning about. So, and I think life is like that as well. As you go through your life in other ways, you have to learn some fundamentals. That's part of adult development. And then as you get closer and closer to where you want to be and maturity as a human being, you can spend more and more time doing those things that you love. And, people tell us that if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. Well, you know what? In my case, I can tell you that's true. I mean, I love what I'm doing. And sometimes it feels like work, but the majority of the time, it's really what I love doing.
Well, I love that you were using the insights that you had from working and the maturity of doing it when you were slightly older to actually feed into that decision of, should I now go ahead, and what is it that I'm going to go ahead and study?
Right? Exactly. Yes.
Now, one of the things that I've spoken to you once before about this, and it really stood out for me then, and I really wanted to tap into it a little bit during our conversation today. You said before that resilience really matters to you, that it has served you time and time again. You've pulled on it throughout your work and throughout your personal life as well. Let's start with this. I think we need a definition of resilience. What does resilience look like?
I have a bit of a comic character in my mind when I think of resilience, and I have a friend who is constantly saying this: onward and upward, and that's Buzz Lightyear, right? So it's a cartoon of Toy Story, and you've got this character saying onward and upward, and we say that to ourselves. That's when you can think about the embodiment of resilience. We have experiences. I have had experiences. I don't want to speak in general terms because everybody's got different experiences, but I've had experiences and they happen. And then I have to make a decision about how to move on, what's the next step here? And I think there's an art to failure that I just wanted to touch on a little bit, and what we can learn through failure. And some people who are in the audience who know me well know that I train for triathlons, and I've been training for quite a few years. And I've mentioned that, you never know what kind of a race you're going to have until you go do that race. And even if you bomb and you don't achieve what your goals were, there is going to be some redeeming factor about that experience that you should be able to remember as a positive. And so if it's not a time that you wanted, let's say you're doing the Run for Women and you set a goal for yourself and you don't quite meet that time, there was probably something very, very positive that came out of that experience, the atmosphere, how it made you feel to be in that moment. And I think those things give you what you need to keep going and have that hope. And when it comes to hope, I have, a definition for that as well. And it's having only positive expectations. And, your mind turns around very quickly when you think of situations as challenges, but exciting. You see the difference. I mean, there are even words that when you say them out loud, pretty hard to say something's exciting with a big frown on your face. So, I think it does give you hope that you have resources and you have people around you that are cheering for you. And just to remember that, I think back to, when I was 30 years old and the impact of knowing that my family was cheering for me, even though to me it was the worst possible moment in that time. But having those cheerleaders along the way, whether they be friends, whether they be colleagues, whether they be family, all of those things are very important. And there's always someone cheering for you. And just remember that.
Joanne, that is such a fascinating way to look at things, because I think that we tend to approach things just naturally as what could go wrong and how can I sort of anticipate those and plan for those, which is good, which I'm guessing every leader needs to do. But I like this idea of approaching things with hope. I just want to say that, by the way, everything you're saying is really resonating. Erin says that she loves this idea of the art of failure on chat. And Melissa says that she agrees. If you don't try, you don't learn. So there's really that idea that, you've got to be ready to fail and develop an art for how you handle failure. Given the space that you're in, I want you heard Sonia say that we are now a year into the pandemic. Can you believe this? I can't believe it's been a year already, 12 months of this. What are you hearing and seeing about the effects of the pandemic on our mental health?
I don't think we can minimize or even really fully understand what the impact of the pandemic is on our mental health and on our use of substances. They're linked together, and we know for a fact, and we know this through evidence and through the research that we've even conducted at the Research Institute, that if you had a mental health or substance use disorder before the pandemic, it's worse now. And we know that there are new people who never really had mental health or substance use disorders in the past, but they do now. And so I think there's a growth that was not unanticipated, but I think the magnitude of the growth is quite significant. Yeah. And that's in the moment. So that's what I want to stress. We only know what we know today about what the impact and the magnitude has been. There will be longer term impacts that we really have to keep an eye on as a society and as a community that's interested in mental health and substance use disorders, because there's a ripple effect. I think of my great niece, who's 7 years old, who has had the experience of wearing a mask to go to school. And many amongst us today, have children or grandchildren who are in that same situation. I didn't have to wear a mask when I went to school. So, generations will have a different experience because of the pandemic, and it could have a longer lasting impact. One of the other byproducts, and I think this is where there is hope, and I think a crack in the window is always an opportunity for hope to get in, is that we are getting attention from government around the need for increased mental health and substance use disorder services. And that the investment is not in those services. That investment is in us. It's in people. It's in those of us who might be reaching out for help for the first time, the second time, or we're still reaching out for help. So, I think being able to draw attention to the fact that all of us have been impacted in a different way by the pandemic, it destigmatizes the topic of mental health and substance use. And I think, many generations are helping with conversations to take place. So, in as much as there's been huge impact, I think that sliver of that window being open is also what is giving us hope in terms of interest in research around mental health and substance use, interest in, who are folks, in being able to predict what might we look at in the future, but more importantly, how do we do this in an upstream way? How do we pay attention to the 4-year-olds, the 5-year-olds, the 7-year-olds, and some of the young people that are coming up now having had that experience at such a young age, and what's that going to mean for the future? So that full spectrum of prevention, promotion to treatment is equally important in a pandemic situation like the one that we've just experienced.
Now, I know that at some point for sure, we're going to move into the part of the conversation where we talk about how to build resilience, because I know that matters to you. It certainly matters to me. I want to hear how it's done. But, one of the things that I want to talk about is this language that I hear a lot, this very, grin and bear it language, just, keep calm and carry on. And I just wonder if you have any concerns about that kind of language, about that way of coping with the time that we're in, which, because, we've just had International Women's Day, I should say, we know now that the pandemic is affecting women substantially at all sorts of levels, right? Financially, emotionally. So talk to me about that language, and if you have concerns about that language.
I don't know that I have concerns if it works for someone, but what I'll talk about is my own lived expertise and my own life experience, and what the language is that I use and how I approach impact. And I'm going to talk a little bit about training again. I'm going to talk about triathlon training, whether it be swimming or running. And, for the women that are going to do the Run for Women, this is something to pay attention to. One of the things that you learn as an athlete is the importance of paying attention to your body and to your mind. And there are some basics that are part of a hierarchy of taking care of yourself. Having food, having hydration, having good sleep, having relaxation, having excitement, having downtime. And that self-awareness that you've got in monitoring, like we're the best computers, right? Like we really are. Human beings are the best computers because we can self-monitor ourselves on every one of those aspects that I've just mentioned. And we can also monitor ourselves in terms of our psychology and how we're feeling and our mood. And they're very connected. And getting back to the running or training, you're constantly checking yourself to evaluate, am I feeding myself enough nutritional food that's going to get me to where I want to be? Am I drinking enough? Am I getting enough sleep? I mean, for me, one of the big things that's really surfaced during the pandemic is sleep. And I don't know if it's where I'm at in my life and what I'm noticing about my own computer and what it's telling me, but I am really noticing a big difference between a 5.5 hour sleep compared to an 8-hour sleep. And my personal goal is to be closer and closer to that 8 hours of sleep, because I have noticed such a huge difference. And I don't know that I noticed that pre-pandemic, but now in the middle of the pandemic, it just seems to make much more sense. So all that about the language of the self-monitoring, I'm okay with language that says, just dust it off and pick yourself up and so forth. If you take the time to monitor yourself, if you take the time to acknowledge, what, maybe I need some professional help here. Maybe I need an expert who's got other skills, who can give me some guidance in what I can be doing for myself. Or, maybe I need a friend at this moment and I'm going to call someone and reach out to them. So I think you really have to discover what's going to work for you on an individual level, and things that are in social media or ideas that are shared by other professionals. That's almost like having a recipe book, and you get to try out different things, and some things are tried and true and we know they're evidence-based, and those are always great to really know what they are, things like sleep and nutrition and connection and feeling that you belong and so forth. But there are other tools as well that are available that you have access to, and reaching out to those. So I hope I've answered your question around, what works for one person may not be the exact recipe that works for another person, But the beautiful thing is that, with social media now, you can have a look at what somebody has as their recipe, and people share so openly now what works for them. And I think the value of everyone having their own expertise of what works for them and how they share that's really a gift. Because if you shared with me an idea today that really worked, I would try that. I would say, oh, I wonder if that would work for me, or, and it's an extra tool that you might try and benefit from.
I love that you say that, we can have our own different coping strategies, but what's important is self-monitoring, and regardless of the coping strategy that you use. Let's talk a little bit about resilience again. I know that we're in the midst of a pandemic, and this word gets thrown around a lot, and sometimes to raised eyebrows. But as a leader, you've in getting to the stage that you're at, you've really pulled on resilience to help you, whether it's in managing people or managing a situation. So talk to me about how one builds resilience during normal times, and also how one builds resilience in the midst of a pandemic.
For me, it's a lot like biking in Gatineau Park. And climbing those hills is a challenge for anybody, no matter how skilled you are. And if you think of the parallel with leadership, there are going to be situations that are a challenge, and time is going to be compressed. And you're going to think, oh my goodness, I don't know how long I can keep this up. This requires a lot of energy. And I think that's what stressful situations take from us, and what they require. They require a lot of energy. And so, climbing that hill takes a lot of energy. Climbing that leadership issue takes a lot of energy as well. Beautiful thing is, there is a top to that hill. And when you get to the top, you might be out of breath, but you coast going down. You can still pedal, you can still move it and keep moving, but you do have a recovery, and it's ebbs and flows. And it's having the awareness in a leadership moment when you've climbed that hill and you've crested, and now you're in a lull phase where things are going smoothly, that's the moment when you take your breather. And I think as leaders, we have personalities that might make us think that we always have to be going at 150%. And what I've learned over time is that there is a time to take your breath and enjoy that lull and take a moment. There's no magic science around the fact that when we all used to travel by plane back in the day, and they used to tell us that you put your oxygen mask on first, and then you help the person beside you. Even if you have children, even if you love those children, even if you have loved ones that are disadvantaged and you're taking care of them. And, enjoying that lull, well, enjoying might be a strong word, but taking advantage of that lull, taking that time to recharge, to take a moment to monitor yourself. What do I need right now? Do I need a break? Do I have to go out for a walk? Do I have to talk to someone? The value of sharing, an issue or a problem with a colleague or with a friend, it's divided by two. You're not carrying it by yourself anymore. So I think that the peaks and valleys that exist in a bike ride are the peaks and valleys that exist in leadership. And that's the association that, I've really benefited from, recognizing that I don't always have to be climbing Mount Everest. When I get to the top of Mount Everest, I can stop and have a tea, and, maybe I'll sleep overnight and just enjoy the view a little bit and think about it. As leaders, one of the things that I've read a lot of literature about, and I think in the early days in my leadership career, I didn't believe it, but it was it was the notion that as leaders, we take time to reflect. And so I believe that now. I mean, and it works for me. And, you know, I try to take advantage of that as much as I can to reflect, to think about situations, how you dealt with that situation. Is there anything I could have done differently? And I mean, nobody else is in your mind thinking these thoughts or knowing what you're thinking that you could have handled differently. But it's like a reprocessing or defragmenting. I don't know if we defrag computers anymore, but it's you're thinking through, you know, could I have done something differently? Is there anything that I could have brought in as resources that would have helped? Are there other people that I could have engaged? Did I really have to handle it alone? Could I have used other people's knowledge and experience to help? You know, I think those are all really good self-reflective questions that as leaders, and particularly women leaders, because I think we're a little harder on ourselves than what we have to be. And we have a lot on the go. I mean, you know, many of us have families as well, and like it or not, we have fathers, but we have mothers too, and there's something about that mothering role and that sister role and so forth that it takes energy too. So I think that monitoring and not being too hard on yourself and taking that time for that self-monitoring is really important. I know I've gone on and on. Maybe
no, this is...
but the lull is important. Enjoy the lull. Take advantage.
This is so, Joanne, I'm going to just repeat both of those points because it is actually a huge learning for me. And I can see all of the little hearts and the thumbs up that you're getting, that it really resonated with people. Jim says, you know, thank you for sharing your story. The sport analogy is wonderful. Jane says the same thing. She says, riding the hills of Gatineau, leadership and managing stress really works for her. You know, I'll say this. I think that point is really important, that you ought to be able to go up the hill and enjoy the coasting. It doesn't mean that you suddenly have to quickly put a little hill into that space because you need that. And I think what's also important is this idea of sitting back and just reflecting on what just happened, the week that went by. What were the good things? What were the things that didn't go right, and what you could, you know, improve on? Is that a written exercise, by the way, that you do, or is it more just sitting and kind of breathing and thinking about it?
You know, there's a lot of really good literature around leadership development. And one of the questions that, you know, a good coach will ask a coachee in sport, or a good executive coach will ask a coachee in leadership development is what could have been done different. And I think it's a good question for us to just remember ourselves to ask, what could I have done differently? And I think that creates muscles in our brains around options, because quite often what makes us feel most uncomfortable is when we don't see that we've got options. Oh my gosh, I've got to do this, and you know, it's going to have this impact. And so I think when we practice thinking of what could have been done differently, what did I learn about this, then we learn how we can create options, and we're not, you know, bound by one single option in tackling a complex leadership issue. And I think that's really important. That's developed over time. There are very talented people who are born with that skill, but the majority of us, myself included, you have to learn that over time. You have to practice it and have epic fails and miss the mark and apologize or say, I'm sorry, I could have handled that differently, and learn from that. And, you know, people are forgiving. I mean, you know, they really are forgiving. But learning from those experiences is really, really valuable.
I love this comment from Andrea. Andrea, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, says, you know, epic fails are important. She says FAIL stands for first attempt in learning. which I really like. And Jennifer also says that it's important to model these things for your team so you can employ the same tools to build their resilience. You know what's interesting, Joanne, and I love this theme that's emerging, that I think I've heard you speak on this before, and I think that's really important, that when you look out at leadership training and leadership books, a lot of it is on how do you manage your team better? You know, what are the metrics you should follow? How do you structure your organization? Very external strategies. And, you know, go out and get this kind of education. And what you're modeling is that it's a little bit of both. Sure, you have to learn that stuff, but you also have to make this computer really great. And I love that idea that we are in an era now that, you know, you're not just talking about learn to network better or learn to manage people better, but also learn to get the best out of yourself by taking care of yourself. I think that's a really important message. How do you give me an instance of how you draw on that resilience in your daily life, the resilience that you've really worked on building over the years? How do you draw on that for your daily life?
Well, I don't have to use that every day, thank goodness. It's more like the park, that there aren't hills after hills after hills after hills. You know, you do get a little bit of a break. But I think in my leadership role there, and the organization, as you know, we've shared early on, is complex. It's got lots of parts and pieces. And so we provide a lot of care. We conduct a lot of research. We're integrating care and research. We have a new strategy called Co-Creating Access, Hope, and New Possibilities. So I absolutely love, you know, the title of our new strategy, and you know, try to embody that as well. But on a daily basis, I think it's knowing that you don't have to be going full throttle at 150% every single day. And I think some of the best outcomes that I've enjoyed in a leadership role have come about when, you know, number one, I've been very focused, but number two, I've also been very charitable and thought of the impact on others as well. Because, you know, I think what we're talking about is the blend of management and leadership. And as a leader, like the stage that I'm at right now is the development of other leaders. And it's not self-serving for me to share what expertise I've developed in leadership, because I'm going to have more experiences and that'll change and so forth. But what's really important for me now is to develop that next level of leadership. And you know, it can be a vice president level, it can be a director level, it can be a manager level, it can be a frontline level, it can be a student, it can be a learner, it can be, you know, someone that's aspiring, or even none of those things, but thinking, I have a different vision for myself that I'd like to see. And I think that's what's important to me now, is really developing that next level of skill in others so that they can become better leaders. I still have my role, and in my job, all the responsibility and accountability that I have in an organization like the Royal. And the Royal's more important now than ever because of what we talked about at the beginning, the impact of the pandemic.
Of course.
But my job is also developing that next level of leadership.
Amazing. And I think, you know, I have to recognize here, I think most people here would know this because it's probably one of the reasons that they've joined us as well, that you are the first female CEO of an Ottawa hospital. So again, you know, this is, I think people joining in here is also a celebration of the fact that you do that. And in that way, you're modeling to other women that such roles are possible. I need to ask you this because I find it fascinating that here you are, a really busy person, and you're also a triathlete. Talk to me about that. Like, how important is that particular exercise or physical activity important for you when it comes to your career and your leadership role?
You know, I do a lot of my thinking when I'm training, and so I have a plan that I have, you know, that I work on, but I have a coach. And so I have a coach for sport and I have a coach for leadership. And so I guess what I'm trying to illustrate and say maybe with the first sentence is I get help from other people who are skilled and can be looking in from the outside and offer support and suggestions and ideas. And what my goal is with training for not one sport, but 3 sports, you know, the swimming, the biking, the running, is, you know, how do I stay healthy as possible, you know, stressing my body that way? And how do I use those activities to keep me as stressless as possible in my workplace? So, you know, I think, you know, the discipline of having a good night's sleep is important for the workplace, but it's also important in sport. And so as one human being, I mean, we have many components. Those are only 2 dimensions that we're talking about right now, but I'm also a mummy to a furry doggy, and his daily walks are very important to me as well. I'm also a wife. That relationship is very, very important. I'm a sister. So like all of those things form one person. But, you know, for me, the sport is a wonderful outlet. You know, it's a social thing for me. I get to be the best that I can physically. I pay attention to those physical things that help me as well with the leadership.
And I think the social connections is something you highlighted as well, right? Yeah. Outside of these other obligations, here you have a place that gives you social connections as well. Yeah. I'll just add in here that I'm sure that people want to ask questions. We are probably about a couple of minutes away from the Q&A. So please type in your questions. If you look to the right of your window, there's a place where you can, or you can put into the chat, and I'm going to watch for it, and I will post those questions to Joanne. Joanne, you know, there's a lot on the plate of the Royal because of what you do and the times that we're in now. How is your organization adapting to the changing needs of the pandemic?
You know, we were very, very quick to recognize that in order to continue to meet the needs of people that we were serving at the onset of the pandemic, but also to serve people who we were not serving yet, that we would have to adapt. And we were already in the virtual space because we are not an Ottawa agency. We serve a large region, and we also serve out of region, the rest of the province, other locations in Canada, etc. So we thought, you know, we'd take advantage of the fact that the virtual platforms that were being designed and improved on would allow us to have a further reach. And so this is what we took on back in the day, and, you know, recognizing that our staff are our most important currency, because, you know, our staff work with clients and families, and they're the ones that are the touch points for people who need help. That, you know, number one, we wanted to make sure that they felt safe and secure and so forth. And we couldn't move everything to a virtual platform because we have inpatient beds, and when people are hospitalized, it's because they require a therapeutic environment for where they're at the moment. So that had to keep going. So we created a dynamic where we had staff that were coming into the location, but also developing an ability for staff who were able to work in their home setting would continue to do so. And it did require us to up our game in terms of technology and ergonomics and so forth, but we've done that now. And what we've learned is that there's a segment of the population that really benefits from virtual care.
Of course.
There's a segment of the population that benefits from in-person visitation, and there's a segment of the population that needs to be served in a hospital environment. But I think having, you know, that wide range now, you know, positions us better to serve people better and differently. So that was one of the first things that we changed, was really to expand that range of options.
Wonderful. Well, I'm already getting a couple of questions, so let me throw some of these at you. Michelle asks, were you always on top of your mental and physical health? And if not, what advice can you offer to get on top? But first, I want to know, actually, were you always on top of your mental and physical health?
No. And, you know, I probably, I can jokingly say, but not.
Oh, I think we might have. Oh, okay. Sorry, Joy. I think we lost you for 30 seconds. So you have to start that over again because I really want to hear that answer.
Okay. So okay. I can jokingly say, you know, that right now maybe I'm feeling pretty good, but I have moments just like everyone. And so those moments of climbing that hill, that can, I don't control that. I mean, those hills are there, and I've got to climb those leadership hills and so forth. But no, I would say that I'm like everybody else. I'm like everybody on this this call today. That you know, I have good moments and I have bad moments. And the better I get to know myself, the easier some certain circumstances are. But you know, I still have moments where I'm not feeling too great about situations, or I'm not feeling too good about family situations, or, you know, I'm lonely. You know, I'm missing people that I would see daily, and maybe I took advantage of that. You know, for me, one of the real impacts is being on a rotational basis, coming into the office location. I don't come in the office every single day. We are trying to reduce traffic in the hospital for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. But when I am coming into the hospital, like I'm coming into the hospital, I'm going to see some people that I haven't seen for a long time. So I think I've probably experienced the same ups and downs as everyone else. And I haven't always been on top of my game. I mean, when I talked about my 30-year-old mm-hmm. self, I didn't talk about my 28-year-old self or my 26-year-old self or my 24-year-old self. I mean, I've had some painful experiences, mm-hmm. but I've chosen today to talk about that 30-year-old self, where, you know, opening that door that was almost that first step into that new direction. But I've had experiences in my life that really could have been much more dramatic and profound than what they were. And I'm not going to say I was lucky. I don't think luck had anything to do with it. I think I had a very, very supportive family, and I had friends that really cared about me. And, you know, that helped me through it. So, you know, whether I wanted the help or not, it was there. And, you know, it helped me through those times where, you know, I would say I was not on top of my game at that point in time in my life.
Well, here's an interesting question. I mean, you're talking about drawing from different sort of groups, your friends, your family, some of your coworkers, to find that strength, right? Laura has this question. She says, how does spirituality play a role in your life, and how can we use this to build our resilience?
You know, one of the experiences that I do have is having worked directly with First Nations and Inuit populations. Mm-hmm. And I actually worked in the Arctic for 3 years earlier in my career. And then I was living amongst the Inuit. And then I also lived in a community with the Cree of Northern Quebec. And I would say that those 5-6 years were very formative, and that I learned a lot about the connection with the environment, with the land, with nature. And for me, that's my spirituality. I would say takes 2 tracks. One is how I connect with nature. And then the second one is how I can help in the development or assistance of others who are on their leadership journey, or who are on a journey and who reach out to me for guidance or help. Like, I'm constantly flattered at any point in time when someone says, can I get a little bit of advice from you on this? And I'm saying, you know, I'm just like everybody here. I'm like, oh, you want advice from me? But, you know, I'm I can offer what I know, and maybe that works for you and maybe it doesn't, but hopefully it resonates with someone.
Oh, I like that. Let's go to this question from Jose. She says, this is actually a fascinating question. What would your advice be for someone who growing up felt that failures or mistakes were not an option?
Well, and I hope you can take this the right way. Fortunately, you're not still growing up. As an adult, now you know you have choices. Those experiences probably had an impact on you of, maybe trying to achieve excellence and maybe doing more than what you were capable of, or viewing the lack of achievement as a failure. But I think today as an adult, what you can do is reflect on those experiences and recognize that you don't have to feel the same way about yourself as a child and those perceived failures. You don't have to think of them that way today. I'll share another story. I used to be I really wanted to be a good piano player when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And my parents bought me a piano, and I started playing when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And geez, I was terrible. I was not very good. I didn't have the ear for it. I still can't play by ear. And I took lessons, I quit. I took lessons, I quit. I took lessons, I quit. And then when I was about 13 years old, I told my mother, I said, I want to take piano lessons again. She said, you want to take lessons? You call the teacher, you go meet with the teacher, and you go convince that teacher that you want to take lessons. And that's what I had to do. But I had all those failures, and I had this idea in my head, oh my God, I can never play the piano, and I really wanted to. And so what I learned at that time was the teacher that I finally connected with when I was 13 years old was able to bring the best out of me. She didn't play the piano for me, but she was able to teach me things that made me a better piano player. And you know what? That little thing made me really happy. But when you ask me the question around, failure and being young and being stuck with that idea. Mm-hmm. So I remember not being able to be a good piano player, but what I remember more was what I achieved when I was finally given a chance and given some guidance and given some advice.
So it's that now that you have the control, you can make that choice and you can actually, do what you have to do in that area. I think we have time for one more question, and Sonia will be joining us back here again. Time flies. Hi, Sonia. So Joanne, let me. I wanted to leave with this, which I think also covers. There's a ton of other questions coming in. What are some immediately actionable ways that you think? I mean, we have a lot of women in the audience that you'd like to pass on to women and men listening on how you have or you've learned to manage stress and anxiety, because it is. I mean, it's a common theme in the before times, which is what I call the before the pandemic, but it's also a very common theme now.
So that's a really good question. And I have an answer that works for me.
Yes.
I think the most important thing that you can do, that I do on an individual basis, is I recognize when I'm anxious and I say, why am I anxious? I get shaky. I'm thinking very quickly, and having that knowledge of self, again, using your computer to monitor yourself to say, oh my gosh, why am I so nervous about this? Or why am I anxious about it? And what else do I do when I'm anxious? Do I speak really rapidly? Do I have self-doubt? What are some of the other characteristics that I start to recognize about myself when I'm feeling anxious? And so that's one thing, is knowing that. But the default that I always go to, number one, is the breathing, is to take the secret of breathing and taking a few deep breaths And that'll work in almost every situation to just calm your physical self down a little bit so that then you can continue processing, why am I so agitated? Why am I so anxious? What's going on with me? What's behind this? And that acknowledgement. But I think the breathing it's one of my secret weapons that, you know, even before you answer a tough question or engage in a discussion that is not going in the direction that you want to, if you take a pause and take a breath, you get to a different place very, very quickly. It's like getting a hand to get up that step.
Oh, great advice. Thank you, Joanne. And I have to echo that too, that the times that I have to go on air, I actually sit for a minute and just breathe. Just breathe for a minute, because before anything, there's always a minute to breathe. And I noticed such a marked difference and then when I go on air, what it sounds like. Thank you again for taking the time to sit with us. And Sonia, let me pass this on to you. There's so many, I don't even know how we're going to, my mind is blown on a couple of things here. I mean, this has been a fantastic discussion.
It is a masterclass in leadership and resilience.
Yeah.
We have just all benefited from Joanne. I am so grateful to you both. The incredible, open, honest, transparent discussion. International Women's Week is founded on inspiration and actionable insight. I could not have asked for a greater hour of true actionable insight and opportunities for all of us to take learnings from you, Joanne, and employ them in many different situations across our lives during and far beyond this pandemic. Manjula, we've had the pleasure of working with you for 1 year now, and that's coming soon, I hope. You are an outstanding journalist, an outstanding colleague, and we thank you so much for being a part of this session. And Joanne, thank you for sharing all of your learnings, your insight, and the opportunities with us so that we can grow as individuals and there as a community.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Wonderful. So on the heels of that masterclass, we are now going to move into our breakout sessions, which are approximately 40 minutes. And then we will then reconvene here on our main stage, our virtual stage. Our two breakout groups include Dr. Kim Karas, the first Vice President of Innovation and Transformation at the Royal, and Dr. Louise Overington, psychologist. They will explore increasing substance use and abuse during the pandemic, strategies to manage stress, and available support. This includes opportunities to address and recognize a problem, healthy ways to cope with the daily challenges and the stress that women are facing during the pandemic. Our second session is led by Dr. Rebecca Robillard, who directs clinical sleep research at the Royal's Institute of Mental Health Research, affiliated with the University of Ottawa. She also co-directs the Sleep Laboratory at the School of Psychology at the University of Ottawa, where she also serves as an assistant professor. She will discuss the importance of sleep and unpack key trends, challenges, and recommendations as we navigate through this pandemic. Perhaps you're having trouble falling asleep, not getting enough of it, like most of us, if not all of us. Join us here to acquire suggestions on proper sleep hygiene, how to learn some simple changes you can make throughout the day to make a genuine difference in your night. When you choose one of our breakout groups, you will have the opportunity to engage in open dialogue. You are invited to turn on your camera and audio to help create a strong connection with others in that breakout group. You can also certainly leave your camera and audio off and observe the breakout sessions if you are more comfortable. We will come back together in approximately 40 minutes to do a wrap up of today's incredible session. Thank you again for being with us. We are now going to open up those breakout groups to you, and we look forward to seeing you back here in about 40 minutes time. Back, everyone. I was just part of a fascinating discussion with so many tools and resources and recommendations on how to get a better night's sleep and all of the risks if you don't have a proper night's sleep. And I break all of the great guidance and rules that Dr. Robillard just shared. And so the parting words that I'd love to leave with you before we go to a stress buster to conclude our session today is, please take the opportunity to visit theroyal.ca. There are a host of resources, opportunities, and supports available to women and men right across our region, frankly, that can guide us through these very difficult times now and beyond the pandemic. Should you have questions about today's session, you'd like to learn more, certainly you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, investottawa.ca. the royal.ca. Very special thanks to the experts who joined us today from the Royal Ottawa, Dr. Kim Carras, Dr. Louise Overington, and Dr. Rebecca Robillard. Just outstanding guidance, lessons learned, ideas, and recommendations that we can all take to improve our own mental health during this pandemic. Nicole, welcome back. I know you're going to chat about the Run for Women, and you're going to guide us through that incredible stress buster activity that will help us to set us up for success for the remainder of our day and something we can take with us forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Sonia. So maybe if we get the slide up, because one of the things that Joanne talked about, and I'm sure both Dr. Robillard and Dr. Carras and Dr. Overington, is the importance of exercise. So the Royal has a big Run for Women happening, from July 4th to 11. I know we have a slide somewhere. There we go.
Wonderful.
And you can join us. You can create your own team and check out that website, runforwomen.ca. Now, this is what's important. You need this coupon so you can get $5 off the $40 registration. So it is Invest21. You can take a look at the right-hand side of their screen. You don't not only support the Royal, where the money goes directly to the Women's Mental Health Program, but actually you're getting a beautiful, great bag pictured there from Shoppers Drug Mart. Wonderful products. It's at least $100 worth product. So it's really, really good. You can join a Royal team. You can join my team, the Royal family, or Tracy Welsh's, which is the 2021 Awesome Royals. So just encourage you to go on to that website. If you want to start your own team, please do so. And we'll see you there. And this is a week long between July 4th and July 11th. So check out the website. We also, I think you saw the video. So that's all I wanted to say about the run. If there's any questions, we can kind of address them in the chat box.
Wonderful. I think we're going to bring her back.
Pardon?
We lost you there for a moment, Nicole, but you're back with us.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go. So the one thing I wanted just for us to kind of close, because, as a health psychologist, the stress is not only, it's most often invisible to the eye, and it really works under our skin. So I like to think of the connection between the mind and body like a tango dance. So how it communicates with our nervous, endocrine, and immune system. So, when I started looking at the research, one of the best stress busters that endocrinologists around the world have agreed on is a really fun, easy, free activity. So I thought, why don't we try it? So if you're sitting down, I want everybody to get up. We're going to be dancing. Come on, everybody get up, start dancing. Because dancing actually releases your endorphins, that feel-good hormone, and it actually lowers the production of stress hormones, so like cortisol. So let's just go. And then you can dance your heart out. So you're actually helping yourself. That cortisol is going down. There we go. Now you can do this here. Right, Sonia? And Joanne. Where we're meeting. There we go. Woohoo!
I love it.
So this is good for all our systems, ladies and gentlemen. All right. And we have to have a little Justin. Yeah, we'll do for 1 minute, and then you can sign off.
This is great.
Are you starting to feel that feel-good hormones happening there, endorphins?
Coursing through my veins. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Well, that's energy.
Perfect. So keep on dancing. Keep on dancing. And thank you, Sonia, for this wonderful opportunity to talk about mental health.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Joanne, to the entire team at the Royal, for all of my colleagues at Invest Ottawa who have worked so hard, not just for today, but for the entire 12 days of International Women's Week. I am immensely grateful. We could not do this without our community. It is truly pouring with our community. Thank you all. Enjoy the resources that have been shared with you today. Please put them to work and share them broadly. And stay with us. There is more excitement to come over the course of this year in support of women, all women from every walk of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.